Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got flood watch out for flooding, a watch for flooding that will be caused by excessive rainfall, and for the Taya River, and it's for the period Wednesday evening, or Tuesday evening through Wednesday evening, and lower portions of the Chilkoot Trail may become inundated near the river there, as the picture shows. And from there, more rainfall coming in farther to the west too, as well as into the northern panhandle there. Pretty heavy rains expected here Tuesday morning through Wednesday, 4 to 6 inches in Whittier, and anywhere from 3 to 4 inches around Cordova, and up to 2 inches in the Valdez area. And Copper River Basin, lighter amounts north side of the coast range there, but still up to half an inch could fall in the Gulkana area, and anywhere from a quarter to half an inch over the Kenai Peninsula, in some cases maybe a little more, half inch to an inch, and on up into the Palmer Anchorage area, and then heavier amounts again over toward the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, inch to inch and a half expected around Squintna, for example. And from there, looking at satellite imagery, you can see low pressure south of the Gulf of Alaska. Some breaks in the clouds today over south central Alaska, and a lot of breaks in the clouds over toward Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay area, around the Pribilofs and the Alaska Peninsula, as well as up over the eastern interior, some sunshine, but a lot of clouds in over the southeast coast, and about 4/10 of an inch of precipitation falling in Yakutat today. Eagle about 2/10 of an inch, and same thing for Juneau, and about 1/10 of an inch at Huslia and over in Indian Mountain. So kind of a widespread area of rain with the clouds covering much of the state today. And looping the infrared imagery, you can see low pressure up over the northwest interior and a band of clouds and precipitation from the central Arctic coast right down into the mid-interior there, west of Fairbanks, in toward Tanana. That brought a fair amount of rain into Galena in the last 24 hours, about 7/10 of an inch there. And then that extends down into the Kuskokwim Valley, western Alaska Range, and then more moisture with clouds off the north coast of the Panhandle. And farther out to the west, you can see the next system edging its way in from the Komodorskis toward the Shimei and Attu area. On the chart, that's a warm front spreading rain in way out there to the west into the southwest Bering Sea. We've got low pressure south of St. Lawrence Island, and along that frontal boundary, the warm front, some rain into the southwest coast and interior there, and areas of rain and snow mixed up over the Arctic coast, north slope into the Brooks Range, depending on the time of day and your elevation there, with amounts anywhere from 1 to 3/10 of an inch, some areas less than that, but generally a pretty good area of rainfall up there as far as coverage goes, is not as far as heavy rain, but kind of a widespread light rain pattern, and showers over the Panhandle. For tonight, we'll have a drying period here coming into southern Alaska before the next batch of moisture rolls up with that system just southeast of Kodiak Island. So rain moving back onto the North Gulf Coast with scattered isolated showers over the eastern interior with some clearing, light winds as well, but low pressure keeping it wet over the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta areas with rain into the Kuskokwim Mountains, and then some showers into the Kuskokwim Valley areas. Stays damp along the Arctic coast, low clouds, fog, rain, and drizzle up there with light winds, though. A little brisk there through the Bering Strait coast of St. Lawrence Island, the backside of that low, small craft advisories out there. And then winds, kind of a break over the Panhandle tonight with lingering showers down to the south, Prince of Wales Island, Metlakatla, over toward possibly Misty Fjords, but even just isolated showers up to the north there. Next system pushing rain into the Aleutians, now pushing over toward Atka late tonight. High pressure in advance of that. Light winds, maybe some clearing for the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula. Basically dry for Bristol Bay. And for tomorrow, southern Alaska back into the rain. Periods of maybe moderate to heavy at times, gusty winds along the North Gulf Coast areas. Gale warnings out along the coast of the Panhandle tomorrow ahead of that front with rain covering just about all of the southeast coast by afternoon. Northern interior, not a little more showery there, and still a chance of some sunshine with some sun breaks. Upper Yukon Valley into the North Slope, but still cloudy and either foggy with light precipitation on the western Arctic coast. Then that warm frontal boundary bringing quite a bit of rain into the Bering Sea. They're linking up with that cold front, so rain for the Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula areas. And looking at Wednesday's forecast, stronger system comes into the Bering Sea with gale force winds, but those gale force winds will be over the western Bering Sea. North of the Aleutians, just looking for small craft advisories from Shimi and Attu in toward Adak late in the day, with rain spreading to Adak by afternoon. Atka to the Fox Islands, not too bad wind-wise, light winds, low clouds and fog, maybe some clearing. And that's pretty much the rule for the entire eastern Bering Sea. Some lingering showers along the southwest coast there, St. Lawrence Island. Drier along the coast of the Arctic coast up there with low clouds and fog. Tightening gradient there with low pressure in the interior. High pressure up over the Arctic there. So pretty gusty northeast winds blowing through the passes of the Brooks Range, maybe anywhere from 20 to gusts possibly as high as 45 miles an hour. With that gradient there, and again, that's the higher passes of the Brooks Range. A little breezy on the eastern Arctic coast, and then some scattered thunderstorm activity possible with due to any clearing that takes place. A little unstable for the air mass there, and that's possible mainly over the eastern interior, north of the Alaska Range there to maybe the Yukon Flats. But periods of rain continue for the North Gulf Coast, spreading into the Panhandle. Lows tonight, 30s for the North Slope, Arctic Coast, and Brooks Range, otherwise in the 40s to lower 50s, or actually lower in the 40s for the central interior, upper 40s to lower 50s, south central Alaska, mid to upper 40s, Copper River Basin, mid 40s for the Pribilofs and the Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s, St. Lawrence Island, Nome, and Tin City, and 45 to 50 for the Aleutians, lows in the 50s for the southeast coast. And then highs tomorrow, in the 60s, near 60 in the northern Panhandle, near 65 to the south, and then highs into the lower 70s, Fairbanks and Fort Yukon over toward Eagle, upper 60s down toward Northway and Tok, and highs in the lower 60s for the Copper River Basin, upper 50s to lower 60s, south central Alaska, the Kenai Peninsula, Kuskokwim Valley, Bristol Bay, upper 50s, Kodiak Island, in the 50s for the Aleutians, Pribilofs, and Alaska Peninsula. And in the 40s from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, upper 40s, say for Kotzebue and Shishmaref. Lows Wednesday morning, 40s south of the Brooks Range to lower 50s in south central Alaska, and mid to upper 50s for the Panhandle, and in the 30s for the North Slope to the Arctic coast, and 40s out west. Looking at highs anywhere from 65 to 72 over the eastern interior, and north of the Alaska Range, Fairbanks area again into Eagle, Fort Yukon, and upper 60s for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather up north, IFR, central eastern Arctic coast, down across the North Slope into the Brooks Range and south of the mountains there into the northern Kobuk and Koyukuk valleys, and some VFR south of that area, upper Yukon Valley, and over toward the Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula, and some more IFR in the mid and lower Yukon River Valley areas out to the Delta, and much of the Bering Sea, although the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula look to be VFR for the morning, and then IFR, Kodiak Island, up into the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, Kamishak, Kachemak Bays, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR for Yakutat, some VFR northern Cook Inlet, and central Copper River Basin, IFR sliding into Prince of Wales Island. And for the afternoon, VFR, Eastern Interior, into the Copper River Basin and the Susitna Valley down into Connect Arm, maybe the portions of the Matanuska Valley as well, VFR in the afternoon. Otherwise marginal there off to the east, southern Copper River Basin, and then IFR along the Panhandle up in toward Elfin Cove, Yakutat, westward along all of the North Gulf Coast, southern Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula down to Fognak and the eastern Kodiak Island, much of the southwest interior, IFR, as well as the Bering Sea, Pribilofs, Aleutians, western Alaska Peninsula, IFR eastern Arctic coast, with a band of marginal VFR across the central Brooks Range, Kobuk and Koyukuk Valley down to the Yukon River. And for the morning, Wednesday morning, IFR for the Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, on up into the Talkeetnas, Prince William Sound, southern Cook Inlet, and much of the Panhandle now in the IFR, with IFR also over the lower Yukon River Valley, down across the southwest interior, Bristol Bay, southern Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, St. Lawrence Island IFR, and IFR pretty well entrenched for the north slope out to the Arctic coast. And then we'll see Wednesday afternoon, IFR for the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle, southern Kenai Peninsula, and marginal VFR, Cook Inlet, band of marginal VFR up along the western Alaska Range to about Denali Park, Copper River Basin, mid and upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country northward there. VFR with scattered afternoon thunderstorms developing in the clearing due to the afternoon heating with the wherever the sunshine breaks out. Otherwise, is IFR, western central Aleutians, southwest Bering Sea, and the Arctic coast and north slope. Passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR. Same forecast for Adigan, looking pretty marginal at times tomorrow for Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill, just call it solid IFR throughout the day Tuesday. And for rainy Tuesday, marginal VFR, windy, marginal VFR to start, becoming VFR into the afternoon. Isabel, VFR, Mintesta, VFR, and Tanita, marginal VFR. And for Portage, same pattern, lowest conditions on that eastern entrance over there on the Whittier side, Passage Canal, and through the pass, and then possible marginal VFR out the western entrance. And for Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, colder air there coming down into the St. Lawrence Island area, 2,000 feet, and south of the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island. You can see quite a gradient there over the Bering Sea, sloping up to about 14,000 feet over the western Aleutians, around 8,000 feet southern and eastern Alaska, 8 to 10,000 feet over the Panhandle. Icing, areas of isolated moderate rime or mixed icing all the way down into Bristol Bay, Dillingham. It kind of expands as you head north there across the Yukon River into the west central interior all the way to the Arctic coast. And the jet stream, northerly flow, upper level low over the Yukon Delta there with 110 knot winds out of the northwest. And then southerlies up to 85 knots blowing right into Yakutat, 9,000 feet, 40 to 45 knot southerlies, North Gulf Coast to the Kenai Peninsula and up into northern Cook Inlet, southerlies 35 knots in the central interior to the Arctic coast. And at 3,000 feet, we've got northwest 45 to 50 knot winds over the west central Aleutians, southeast 55 knots on the North Gulf Coast. Turbulence, considerable moderate chop for the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast into south central Alaska, western central Aleutians, St. Lawrence and Kodiak Islands.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called CocoRUS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that CocoRUS is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what CocoRUS is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades they're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So, how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So, tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So, then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So, it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So, let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations. And you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side. And I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding. And Rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRaz. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoraz.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRaz. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis is not a lot different than it's been for a few days now. Still some areas of ice along the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline there, and a little bit heavier farther to the north. And just kind of shifting around and melting in place is the expected trend for the next few days. And from there, the coastal water forecast. Gale warnings for the coast of the Panhandle tomorrow. For the south coast, looking at southeast winds 35 knots, seas up to 14 feet, and 30 to 35 knot easterly winds for the north coast, seas 15 feet. Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay, much lighter winds there, southeast at 10. And Stevens Passage, southeast winds 15 knots, and Clarence Strait, southeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. For Wednesday, Clarence Strait, small craft advisories, southeast winds 25 knots, 4-foot seas, and winds south out along the coast and lighter, small craft advisories on the central and south coast for 25 to 30 knot winds, seas around 10 feet, and for the north coast, south winds at 20 knots with 10-foot seas, and the northern central inside waters looking at southeast winds at 20 knots. Prince William Sound, east winds 25 knots, seas 6 feet. Gale warnings there for the Middleton Island portion of the North Gulf Coast for east winds of 35 knots and northeast winds 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, north 30 knots for Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 30 knots for southern Cook Inlet, and northeast winds 25 knots north of the Forelands. Lighter winds in store for Cook Inlet on Wednesday, south to southeast 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 4-foot seas. For the Barren Islands, or for Kamishak Bay, southeast winds 15 knots. The Barren Islands south at 20, and the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, southeast winds 20 knots, seas as high as 8 feet. Kodiak Island, small craft advisories, north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest winds 15 knots, and west winds 15 knots for Bristol Bay. For Wednesday, Alaska Peninsula, south winds 15 knots. Kodiak Island, south to southwest winds at 20. Bristol Bay, southwest, 15. For the eastern Aleutians, we've got south to west winds, 15 to 25 knots for Tuesday, strongest around Unimak Island. South 25 knot winds for the central Aleutians, and the western Aleutians, west-southwest winds at 20 knots. For Wednesday, for the western Aleutians, look for west winds, 25 knots, turn southwest at 25 around Amchitka Island. And then for AKwx, south winds 20 to 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots with seas 5 to 7 feet. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, west winds 20 knots, seas 6 feet. And small craft advisories for the Yukon Delta coast, where winds will be north at 30 knots with 8-foot seas. North winds 25 knots for St. Lawrence Island, seas 7 feet. And 30-knot northeast winds for St. Matthew Island and the Pribilofs, westerlies at 15 knots. And for the day on Wednesday, small craft advisory, St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island for north to northeast winds at 25 knots. For the southwest coast, north to northwest winds at 20 knots. For the Pribilofs, east winds 20 knots, seas 5 feet. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, Tuesday, east winds at 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Central coast, northeast at 15, and the western coast, northeast winds 20 knots. And from Wales to Cape Lisbon, or from Wales to Cape Lisbon, north winds 20 to 25 knots. And looking ahead to Wednesday, small craft advisories for the eastern Arctic coast there for east-northeasterlies at 25 knots. Small craft advisories also for the western Arctic coast, northeast winds 25 knots there, and small craft advisories from Cape Thompson to Wales for north winds at 25 knots, central Arctic coast northeast at 20. For tonight, look for areas of rain, fog, showers, and drizzle along the Arctic coast. There are winds on the light side. Some of that could be mixed with snow at times. Otherwise, scattered isolated showers over the central and eastern interior down to the Alaska Range. Kind of a dry period coming for south central Alaska ahead of that next batch of rain coming up. They'll push into Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast late tonight. Mostly dry for the Panhandle, a few lingering showers down to the south and to the north. Next system pushing rain into the Aleutians. Cloudy and wet, southern half of Alaska, mostly cloudy and cool for the northern half, about sums it up on Tuesday. And for Wednesday, rain spreads into the northern Panhandle, scattered thunderstorms over the central interior. More rain and cool temperatures for southern Alaska up to the Brooks Range.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.